Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really want to thank my dear friend Jim Long. He's modest, but he's actually an author, a filmmaker, an Egyptologist, and his dear wife, Carol. Thank you so much for all the efforts that they made into making this happen. And I thank you. I know many of you have come from distances to be here, so I guess you like the temple, or something like that if you're here. Did you like my son Hillel's performance? Wasn't that electrifying? So there's a joke. A Jewish man, a Jew, is elected president of the United States. And his mother is there at the inauguration in the front row. And you know the joke, right? And she's beaming and she's so proud. And she turns to the woman sitting next to her and she says, "You see that man up there? His brother's a doctor." So my son is an archaeologist. I'm very, very proud of him. So Hillel spoke about the physical aspect, the logistics, the structure, concrete facts on the ground about where the temple is located. And I want to fill in a little bit about the spiritual side of what it's all about and why we need the temple altogether, what the whole concept of building the Holy Temple is all about. I know some of you may be followers of the Temple Institute, and for 30 years now, really, I have been privileged to be at the forefront of this movement, which is dedicated to the building of the Holy Temple and to raising consciousness as to why it's important, not only for Israel, but for all mankind. And this movement of what we could call temple awareness, temple consciousness, preparation, the growth of this movement has been phenomenal over the past decades. Began as something that was thought of in Israeli society as very much maybe something on the periphery, you say in English, on the side, it was kind of like maybe fanatical or weird or something like that. And now it's become very mainstream to the extent that large segments of Israeli society are behind it. It's even discussed by members of Knesset, the whole problem of the Islamic control of the Temple Mount and the fact that Jews and Christians are not permitted to pray there. These things are part of the public awareness now and consciousness like never before. But again, the concept of the Holy Temple is something that is applicable and important for all mankind, not only for Israel, because according to every prophet of the Bible of Israel, the Holy Temple, it's about the restoration of God's honor, as well as the spiritual rectification of man's relationship with God and indeed the hope of mankind. It all depends on the Holy Temple, and really the prophets tell us that the hope of the world is dependent on the Holy Temple, right? We read in Isaiah 2, "It will happen in the end of days, the mountain of the temple of the Lord Hashem will be firmly established as the head of the mountains, and it will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will go and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For from Zion will the Torah come forth, and the word of Hashem from Jerusalem. He will judge among the nations and will settle the arguments of many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, and they will no longer study warfare.'" Sounds basically like the United Nations, what the United Nations is supposed to be. But this is very deep. Why the Holy Temple is the hope of the world. Why is that? It goes back to the whole concept of the purpose of creation, why it's the temple that unifies mankind. And we study that the purpose of creation was that God sought an abode in this world. And of course, by this we don't mean a physical house. We mean the concept, the idea of everything in this world being recognized as being elevated to godly purpose. The whole idea of the Torah, the Bible of Israel, the whole concept of the creation is that God loves this world. This world is what's important. There's a beautiful concept, in the Midrash, the teachings of the sages, that when Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, the angels it's homiletical, of course. The angels were very angry, right? The teachings are a poetic vehicle to give over a certain idea. So the angels were very angry, and they said, what is he doing here? What is a human being doing here? You're going to give the Torah to the world? And so Moses was very taken aback, was very frightened, and God said, you answer them. So according to this teaching, Moses said to the angels, okay, it says in the Torah, honor your parents. Do you have parents? And he gave other physical examples of the performance of God's will, the commandments in this world. And that's really the whole idea. So God sought an abode in this world, and the building of the temple and the spiritual tikkun, rectification that it brings about, is also very much connected to the goal of human existence. So right here in Northwest Arkansas, in the Embassy Suites, in this corner of Arkansas, is it possible for me to, in a pithy and succinct way, sum up the goal of human existence in one sentence? I've been thinking about it. From the mindset of Israel, of the Torah of Israel, of the mandate that Israel was given, what is the goal of human existence? And it is to reveal God's presence in this world, because his presence is concealed on purpose, because we're supposed to look for him. To reveal his presence, to connect to him in everything that we do, to make that presence known to other people. And most importantly, the role of man is to constantly be presented with opportunities to choose between right and wrong. This concept of free choice, as we read in Deuteronomy, I've placed before you today, blessing and the curse, life and death, choose life. This is so important, the idea of choosing. It's the foundation of everything. That by choosing good, we sanctify God's name, we elevate everything and uplift creation, really. And what happens in the Holy Temple is that we are called upon to define and to refine our own humanity. It's an experience that goes on in the Holy Temple. What goes on there is designed to empower a person to strive to become a better person. And really, I would need not 45 minutes, but 2,000 years to really talk about what is it that goes on in the temple. For example, the system of the offerings, which is completely misunderstood because we're looking at it from a Western mindset. What a person is going through by bringing an offering to God, and all the things that go on there that are designed to impart to a person the sanctity of life. So hopefully, I hope, if you're here tonight, it's because you are drawn to this idea, this vision, this promise of a better world, of the time of the Holy Temple, which really makes sense, I think, for every sensitive person to feel the pull of the temple, because we are all the common ancestors, the common descendants of Adam. And we are taught that Adam himself was created from the place of the altar in the Holy Temple. So everything revolves around the temple, all of human existence, really. It's anchored in the cycle of time. And the Hebrew calendar, if you're familiar with the Hebrew calendar, every month is focused on the experience of the Holy Temple. And tonight, I don't know if you're aware, but at this moment, we've just begun a new month. Tonight is Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new Hebrew month of which month? Kislev. And Kislev is all about the Holy Temple, the story of Hanukkah. So you can't get very far without being reminded of the centrality of the Holy Temple in our lives. And as my son mentioned, it would be hard to forget where that is exactly. Now, the Holy Temple is also central basically to every Torah portion. And if are any of you serious students of the Tanakh, and do you go through the weekly Torah portions? So we are reading now in the book of Breshit, Genesis, the Torah portions that deal with the forefathers, with the patriarchs. And each one of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they each sought and developed their own personal relationship with the Almighty through this place. Of course, we read about Avraham, we read about Abraham, who brought Isaac to Mount Moriah, and then also Jacob laid his head and saw the vision of the ladder, there's a very, very deep teaching that our sages tell us about Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and is based on the verses in these Torah portions. And it goes like this. Abraham, what did he say? He said in Genesis 22:14, he said, in the mountain the Lord will be seen, or he will see even. So Abraham called the place of the Holy Temple a mountain. Isaac called the place of the Holy Temple a field. The verse states that when Eliezer was bringing Rivka, and she saw him and she said, who is that man? So the verse says that he went out to meditate in the field, and that was the place of the Holy Temple. Jacob, when he woke up from his dream, he said, this is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Abraham called it a mountain, Isaac called it a field, Jacob called it a house. What is this all about? A mountain is something that is more foreboding and difficult and more off limits to a person. A field is already something that's cultivated, that's user-friendly, that has a direct effect and benefit for humanity. But a house is a home. And as we read in the vision of Isaiah, that the nations will say, let us go up to the house of the God of Jacob. So what the point is that each one of these men perceived their relationship with God through this place. But the most important thing that we understand about the Holy Temple is that it's not about a building, it's about a relationship. In other words, this whole concept, everything that's important to us here, everything that we're discussing, this is not some cult about architecture. It's not about a physical building, it's about a concept. That's what the Holy Temple is all about. It's about deepening and developing our understanding of our relationship with God in an intimate way and how real that is. Because the presence of God is concealed in this world, and one of the ideas about the Holy Temple is that every person is able to come there and be refreshed and be renewed and engage in this direct unfolding revelation of just how close we really are to God at all times. So Abraham said, on the mountain, Hashem will be seen. And the verse continues and says, as it is said, this day, because the whole idea of the Holy Temple from the beginning of time is forever. And the prophets all tell us that in the future, all the nations, every person is going to know God through this place. So the idea is that every human being is connected to this place. And interestingly, Torah calls it the place, right? As we read in Genesis 22:4, that Abraham on the third day, he saw the place from afar. And throughout the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim, the Torah keeps referring to this as the place that I will choose, the place that I will show you, which really means the place that God chose from the very beginning of time. And then, of course, David and Samuel established through their own prophetic process that this is the place, Mount Moriah, the shoulder, as it says in Deuteronomy, between Benjamin and Judah, those tribes. This is the place that was designated from the very, very beginning of time. And it's unlike any other place on earth, as nice as Northwest Arkansas is, of course. This is the place where the eyes of God are upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, because this is the concentration of the divine presence. And this is the place where every person is able to come again and be seen there by God. So the idea of the Torah calling it the place, and it's interesting because we're approaching it from this academic and scholarly way as, well, where is the place? Where is the place? And of course, Abraham saw the place from afar, and some people today really see it from afar. But the idea is, it's a place which defines the dimension of space in this world, but it's also, it transcends space. I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a very amazing teaching that you can investigate yourselves, that in the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and we need to talk a little bit later about the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was placed in the Holy of Holies, but yet that chamber, that room, was actually too small to hold the dimensions of the Ark. And yet the Ark was placed into that chamber, and it stood there. But the idea that's being conveyed is that it was above space. it didn't take up any space. There's something going on here, not mystical, but very practical, that this is a revelation of God in the world. Also, interestingly, the Torah teaches us that God himself is referred to as the place, because he is the placeholder of the world. The world, the sages teach, the world is not his place, but he is the place of the world. So all of our eyes are focusing on this place. This place is the reflection of his honor. Psalms 132 tells us, this is my resting place forever and ever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. Hillel mentioned the stone. The foundation stone, we are taught, is the foundation of creation, the beginning point of creation upon which the Ark of the Covenant rested. And thus, the Holy Temple is the source of prophecy, the source of wisdom. And that means that in temple times, the Jewish people are commanded to make the pilgrimage 3 times a year as a minimum. But many other people also came to the Holy Temple. The nations came to the Holy Temple and were welcomed there. And the idea is that every person who came there was able to somehow find their place. I'm wondering, where in the world am I? What is my purpose in this world? Coming to the Holy Temple was about receiving a word of who I really am and how I really connect with everyone, to literally find out what my place is in the world. So today as well, people who are searching for this concept of godliness, who see through the sham of the world, who are seeking to connect with God in a real way, they're naturally drawn to this place, because it's the key not only to understanding the future, but also to man's presence. So I like to believe, all of us that are here tonight, that whether or not we know it, right, whatever we do in this world, we're really looking for that place. We're looking for the place of God in this world. Because really the fate of mankind hinges upon that place. So the idea is, and Hillel mentioned, and I personally, in the Temple Institute, I must be receiving 20, 30 emails a week about these theories. These theories that the Temple Mount is really somewhere else, that the Holy Temple is located somewhere else, to the extent that I could say it's an attack. The location of the Holy Temple is under attack. And I feel that there's a very direct connection between this very tangible, very concrete issue, the location of the temple, as simple as it would seem, and the connection between this and the spiritual aspect and significance and dimensions that we're discussing. The bottom line is that we live in a world of fake news, right? Everybody knows that. We're always talking about fake news. And to be perfectly frank, and it's a bold step to be addressing this issue frontally, to be confronting it. But the bottom line is, it's a lie. It's a lie to say that the Temple Mount is anywhere else, that the temple was located anywhere else. But its true location. And it's the mother of all fake news. Again, I'm just calling it as it is. If I'm defending the honor of the God of Israel, I don't have to be polite, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So people, though, are very invested in these other theories. And, people have been very angry. And they say, can't you consider it? Can't you keep an open mind? And the reason that I can't keep an open mind is because it's the wrong place. And also, doesn't it matter what God says? Because any other place is simply wrong. But I want you to open up your heart in the deepest way and understand on a deep level what's really going on here. Why is it that this falsehood is becoming so popular? And it's really, really being taken over in certain quarters and being touted as a way that the temple could be built that much quicker. Because after all, if we don't have to disturb any of the current Islamic structures or something like that, then we could build it that much quicker. This is all based on incredible naivety of the geopolitical reality of what's really going on in Israel. But in any event, the presentation that my son gave you was called The True Location of the Temple Mount. And if you put those words into YouTube, you'll get dozens of videos purporting that other places are the true location, which is why he chose that title. So it's spreading, and this popularity is growing. And I want to know why that is. And the answer is because we are locked in a struggle for the truth at this particular time. And you know that whenever something is good, whenever something is godly and true, it's always confronted by opposition. And these attempts are basically, and again, it's late, we're all tired, I've been traveling, I'm just going to be direct, right? These are attempts to unseat God, to obscure, to muddy, to stop the truth of what's really going on. Why? Precisely because the Temple Mount is the Temple Mount. And that's why it's being contested, because falsehood always attacks the truth. And furthermore, again, just to be totally honest with you, this is another ploy to delegitimize Israel and to erode her standing and sovereignty. It's a very idiosyncratically Jewish topic, and it takes a bit of arrogance to purport that we don't know where the temple is, right? Aside from the fact that it is based on the denial of biblical truth, of Jewish history, of archaeological evidence, but where is it really coming from? You know, this is a very, very fascinating idea that some of you may be aware of. The Bible tells us that the entire land of Israel is promised to the children of Israel. And that's a fact. But there's 3 places where the Bible actually records that they were purchased. In other words, the whole land was promised, okay. But there's a deed of sale that the Torah bothers to record about 3 places, literally to say, or as if to say, that if someone would come along and challenge our sovereignty in these places, we can actually prove it, right? What are those 3 places in chronological order? We just read about it in the Torah portion of Chayei Sarah, the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron, right, which Abraham purchased from Ephron the Hittite, the tomb of Joseph in Shechem, in Nablus, and, of course, Mount Moriah, the threshing floor or another Jebusite, which King David purchased. And so ironically, these 3 places are the only places that I could actually show you a deed of sale, and they are the 3 places that have come to symbolize, that have come to epitomize all the contention over sovereignty in the land of Israel. And furthermore, these are places that the United Nations declared are exclusively Islamic sites. Right? So UNESCO, the United Nations, declared in a declaration that the tomb of my father in Hebron is an Islamic site. It declared that the Temple Mount is an Islamic site. By the way, they also declared that Rachel's tomb is an Islamic site. The Muslims were never even interested in Rachel's tomb except to throw firebombs on it, onto the Jewish worshippers. So that's also an Islamic site. And the Palestinians are constantly ransacking, destroying, defacing, and igniting Joseph's tomb in Shechem. So this is another level of this phenomena that we see. But I like to be honest and direct. I'll tell you even better what this really is. The contention that the Temple Mount is not where it is another form of what we call replacement theology. Honestly, that's all it is. And it's put forward by people who have an agenda. So the agenda might be writing a book, it might be fame, it might be fortune, or it might be their own theological motivation. But like they say, you can fool some of the people some of the time. But you can't pull one over on God. And this is an extremely important issue because there is a certain spirit that is motivating these hucksters. Yes, hucksters, charlatans who actually think that they can pull one over on him, right? Again, we've been learning in these Torah portions of Genesis, other generations who thought that they could fool God, like the generation of the flood and the builders of the tower and the citizens of Sodom and Nimrod. There's a long list of people throughout history who think that they can pull one over on him. So I want to talk about this month of Kislev that has just begun tonight. Kislev is all about Hanukkah. So now, what is Hanukkah all about, right? Potato pancakes that you might eat with sour cream or applesauce or a little bit of both. Donuts. In Israel, we eat donuts. Or spinning the dreidel. Hanukkah is not about those things. Hanukkah is about the struggle for the purification of the temple. And it's about the struggle for sovereignty over the land of Israel. And the story, very, very briefly, is that invaders, a foreign domination, foreign influence, took over the temple, and they desecrated it, and they attempt to drive a wedge between Israel and her God, and to drive God's presence away with their foreign spin. Now, the fact is, although there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish casualties, and this was a war that went over a course of decades, there were hundreds of thousands of casualties, but first and foremost, it was a spiritual battle. And this is just an interesting idea. Hanukkah as opposed to Purim. If you remember the holiday of Purim was about a physical threat. It was a physical annihilation, a decree of annihilation that had been decreed against the people of Israel. But Hanukkah was never about a physical threat. The reason that there was such a long and protracted war is because the Jews were rebelling against the edicts. The edicts that the Greek invaders made was they forbade the people of Israel from studying the Torah, from circumcising, from celebrating Rosh Chodesh, which is tonight, the new moon, marking the sanctity of time, God's sacred seasons, and from observing Shabbat. And their goal was to spiritually destroy the Jewish people. But ultimately, Hanukkah is about a battle for the home, both for God's home and for our home, the land of Israel. And thus, how do we observe Hanukkah? By kindling these lights, right? Now in Israel, the custom is to light them actually right outside the home, outside the door, so that we come into the doorway and we are surrounded by God's commandments. We have the mezuzah on one side, and we have the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah candles on the other side. And sometimes it's lit in the windows. And there's a tradition that when we light these Hanukkah lights, this is actually the light of the menorah of the Holy Temple that we are bringing back into the world. It's an aspect, a spark of the original hidden light of creation through which God created the world. And the statement that we are making when we light the Hanukkah candles is that we will not allow any usurper to come between our nation and God, as they attempted to do. And of course, every power that ever attempted to do that is no longer here. They're in the dustbin of history. So, it's not a popular position, our position, because these ideas are becoming so entrenched in a popularized mentality. But I think, at least I would like to address them for what they are. They are unlearned, cheap attempts to de-Judaize the Temple Mount, to delegitimize the Jewish people. But the fate of the world is what really hangs in the balance. And all of these denials, including those of the United Nations, they are basically attempts to unseat God from his land and from his city. And again, the question really is, why is this going on right now? So first of all, more is being accomplished in our generation towards the rebuilding of the temple than ever before in history. Again, I know many of you follow the work of the Temple Institute. You can at templeinstitute.org and at our Facebook page, and you can subscribe to our weekly YouTube Torah lessons. But this has been going on for 3 decades. And the Temple Institute is at the forefront of leading the way in preparing for the Holy Temple, not only in the construction of vessels, but also in scientific research, in technological advancements. We have created all of the architectural blueprints for the building of the temple. We have established a school for training the Kohanim, the young men of priestly descent, in the service of the temple. We have recreated the incense offering, the baking of the showbread, revitalized these ancient commandments. I can actually share with you, this is new, and something that has not been shared with American audiences, but we actually have a red heifer. I don't know if you're aware of the significance of this. This is a biblical prerequisite based on Numbers 19. In order to actually reestablish purity, it's necessary for us to have a perfect red heifer. This has been the product of many decades of preparation. So all of these things are really pointing the way to the fact that we're indeed living in a very, very remarkable time. And of course, as Ecclesiastes tells us, God created this opposite that in the realm of holiness, in the realm of progress, in the realm of spiritual revolution, there's always going to be an antagonist, there's always going to be an opposition, which is exactly what we're seeing now. But the subject matter is too important for us to remain silent, because indeed the future of the world is totally dependent on the clarification of this place, the place where God will make his presence known. We read in Ezekiel chapter 37, very beautiful prophecy. They will dwell on the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, within which your fathers dwelled. They and their children's children will dwell upon it forever. And my servant David will be a leader for them forever. I will seal a covenant of peace with them. It will be an eternal covenant with them, and I will place them and increase them, and I will place my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be among them. I will be a God to them, and they will be a people to me. In this important verse, then the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary will be among them forever. And this verse and many others are indicating to us that the temple is what really focuses all of humanity together in this unparalleled unity and harmony and understanding, divine origin of life, the purpose of life, and the purpose of human existence together, really to know God in all of our ways and to reveal that presence in the world. So this is our prayer, our blessing, our hope that unites us. I really am very thankful to all of you for being here tonight, especially for those that organized the event. And anyone who has any questions at all about either of our presentations, perhaps Hilla could come up and join me, and we can attempt to answer them. He's a great kid, handsome, an archaeologist. Sorry? No.
He's a kind of shrink.
Actually, one brother is a social worker. One brother is one of Israel's leading mixed martial artist trainers. One brother is an electrician. And there's some more brothers, but this is enough for now. There's also sisters. All right.
Anybody have questions for either Hillel or okay?
Do you have any pictures of what the future temple, what you propose it will look like? And the red heifer, has it been genetically encoded to be a red heifer?
Okay, so number one, we have hundreds of pictures and depictions. We have many, many publications. You can enjoy the features at templeinstitute.org. We have a new book in English, which is coming out within this month also, that you'll be able to learn about on our website. So yes, we have many, many depictions. The red heifer, so, there have been throughout the years news reports of red heifers that were born here or there or other places. I like to call them sightings, like UFO sightings. The reason I say that is because whenever they appear, they generate a tremendous amount of excitement. Because everyone knows, or those who know that there is a direct link between the concept, and we can explain it also if we have time, the concept of the red heifer and it being a herald of the building of the temple. The thing is that in the natural world, strictly from an agricultural standpoint, I know a lot about cows. You wouldn't think so, but I've learned. So when it comes to the natural birth of the red heifers in the wilds, as it were, that was not planned, they can very quickly begin to turn white, first in the tail. And that is an invalidation according to the Bible, because they have to have not even 2 hairs of any other color. So we have succeeded in breeding. I wouldn't call it genetically modified because there hasn't been any necessity for any sort of genetical engineering, but we have succeeded in breeding Red Angus, perfect Red Angus. And the issue really is not so much the birth of the calf, which is not that unusual under the proper circumstances. The issue is the first 3 years of the calf reaching the age that is required. The calf has to be raised in a very specific environment, under very specific criteria and conditions, because it cannot be subject to any one of a variety of physical blemishes that are very common with animals, whether internal or external. So the calf has to be raised really under a tremendously protective environment in order for it to thrive. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, another question?
I have a question everybody here wants to answer to. Do you know where the Ark of the Covenant is?
It's really not a secret. I mean, it was a good movie. There's a lot of stuff in boxes in Deep State and in the swamp, but the Ark of the Covenant is not one of them. The Ark of the Covenant is located in a specially designed chamber underneath the Temple Mount. It was hidden there by Josiah, king of Israel, years before the first temple was destroyed. That chamber was designed specifically by King Solomon, who was the wisest of all men, according to tradition. With that in mind, we never said it was lost. So, I mean, lost Ark, I mean, we never said it was lost. It is hidden. But there have always been those in every generation that have known exactly where it is. And when the time comes, we hope to retrieve it. If that's what's keeping you up at night, I suggest you get a good night's sleep.
Another question? Yes, sir.
The number 25.20, David Flynn in his book, Temple at the Center of Time, mentions that as one of the measurements between holes drilled in some of the oldest, apparently Solomonic temple rocks or stones. And I wanted to know whether that number is accurate or not.
Are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with that book or that work, sorry.
Just for your information, it is culmination in modern terms of what Sir Isaac Newton did for about 20 years in trying to decipher things, especially in Daniel. But he links it to time and date, and just to give you an example, in the book, he says that the distant, well, first of all, he says that Sir Isaac Newton based the English system of measurements on the ancient temple measurements. And then he says that the distance from the Dome of the Spirits to the old Roman center stone in London is 1,948 miles. Interesting number. And there are a lot more like that in his book.
It is fascinating, but and I'm aware of the conjecture about the Dome of the Spirits, but we have an unbroken knowledge beyond question, in my opinion, that the stone underneath the Dome of the Rock is indeed the foundation stone.
Okay, another question. Yes, sir.
I was just going to ask exactly what you just said. You said you had unbroken knowledge that. Would you share just a few of those things with us that verify that what the dome is now is actually above the site?
Again, you have to understand that these matters have not been discarded. They were never forgotten by the Jewish people. There is a tremendous amount of literature that is part of the tradition of the Jewish people. One of the rabbis of Jerusalem 600 years ago gave eyewitness reporting to many of the details of the Temple Mount. The barest and most perfunctory study of Islamic history will reveal to you that the whole reason that the dome was built there in the first place was to guard over the spot of the Holy of Holies of the temple. The work was actually under the direction of a Jew. There are many other things that are fascinating, but my son, as a professional archaeologist, would disagree with me because he wouldn't say that they're verified, but an aerial view of the stone underneath the dome reveals a niche, which is the exact proportion of the western wall of the sanctuary, which was actually planted up against the stone. And then there are also markings on the stone that fit the dimensions of where the Ark of the Covenant sat. But because I cannot prove that to you beyond the shadow of a doubt, an archaeologist will not accept those facts. But, he's a nice kid, but he doesn't know everything.
Again, the archaeological point of view, I think one of the strongest things to talk about is the Islamic tradition, which, as an archaeologist, we know that a lot of the places, a lot of the locations that we know of today were preserved through the Islamic tradition, which continued the Byzantine tradition. So, for instance, the Arab village of Silon is named after Shiloh, Silwan after the Siloam, the Shiloach, okay? El Jib after Givon, Bitin after Bethel, and so on and so forth. So I would say that it's even stronger in a location like where the temple stood, which is the most famous building in the world. So it's a little hard to think that the location would have moved. So the Islamic tradition, I think, is a very important indication here. I showed you that a reference from the 9th century to the stone of the temple. So I think really the X marks the spot in this case.
Also, Hillel mentioned the phenomena of Islamic denial of temple history, which actually is a fairly recent phenomena. Now, there's some booklets that I have original copies of that I actually usually have with me, but I don't have them with me on this trip. But you can see them online at the Temple Institute website. These are important booklets because they are published by the Islamic Waqf, and they are English language guidebooks which are meant for tourists who are visiting the Temple Mount, and they publish them throughout the years. And we have an original copy of one that was published in the 1920s. And there it states in English regarding the Temple Mount, and it's written by the same folks, the Islamic authorities that are today governing over the Temple Mount, and who today deny the existence of the temple altogether. There it says that the site is universally acknowledged as being the site of the Holy Temple, and that its identity as being the site of the temple is beyond dispute in those very words. And when is it that they change their tune? We have other copies that are dated from the 50s and the early 60s, and there the entire section has been rewritten. It's called Revisionist History, and it says that this site has been associated with Islam from its very beginning. But the change was not done after 1967, as they would have you believe, that everything is about the occupation. The change was done after 1948. Change was done after the establishment of the State of Israel. And that's when they began to politicize the whole reality of the return of the children of Israel to their land.
Okay, another question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, once in the future when construction does begin on the temple, what's the duration for completion of the temple?
Are you in a hurry on this? Okay. I don't see why it would be longer than any building project of comparable magnitude. There's some infrastructure work that has to be done in terms of purification, but I don't see it being more than a year.
Another question. Sir.
So when you finally do have a red heifer that's ready for sacrifice, does it have to be done at the original altar location, and has that been identified?
The red heifer is not a sacrifice. First of all, you said the S word. I never say sacrifice, I say offering. Sacrifice is a wrong word to use for the Hebrew concept of bringing an offering to Hashem. But in any event, I don't mean to attack you, just that always gets mine. Now, the red heifer is a process. It's not actually a temple offering, because the red heifer is not offered in the temple, it's offered opposite the temple, gazing into the temple from the Mount of Olives. And we do know the exact location on the Mount of Olives where that was done.
You okay for more questions?
Sure.
Okay, another question.
Ma'am.
So if the foundation stone is underneath the rock,
The dome.
the dome, won't it have to be destroyed in order to get to it, to rebuild the temple?
Let's put it this way. Again, the prophets of Israel promise that more than anything else, the characteristic of the time of the temple is peace and harmony. I read to you the verses from Isaiah about all nations coming together. Personally, I don't believe that it will come about through aggression. However, there are a number of scenarios that the prophets talk about that differ. Would it have to be destroyed? All I can tell you is that it was built there taking advantage of Jewish exile and squatting on the one place that the God of Israel chose. Afterwards, throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, the forces of Islam have continued to our very time now to deliberately destroy all of the evidence, the vestiges of the Holy Temple in an attempt to hoodwink the world that there never was a temple. Zechariah 14 says, on that day God and his name will be one. Some people ask if maybe there could be some sort of time sharing, and that, by the way, is one of the motivations of some of the other theories, not so much the City of David theory, but there are those also who maintain that the temple could be built on the Temple Mount right next to the dome. Again, I'm just a very direct guy. I don't know why on that day that God and his name would be one, why God would share that honor with a desert cult, a murderous desert cult. So that's not what we're really looking forward to. How is it going to come about exactly is a different question. That has to do with the spiritual revolution. It has to do with education, with priorities, with values. It has to do with the will of the people of Israel who are so much wanting that godly life and who are so ready for that, which, by the way, is going on now in Israel progressively, that kind of spiritual revolution. So how exactly it will come about, honestly, my personal belief, which might sound a little naive, I believe that when the Jewish people shine their light, when they are exemplary of the people that they are supposed to be, and they are bringing the world to a knowledge of God, which is what our destiny really is, I believe that the Muslims will come and say, please build the Holy Temple. And I know that they have a tradition that is supposed to happen, that we are supposed to build the Holy Temple. So that's my prayer.
One more question.
Can I ask one of them? I mean, this is my second one, I don't mean to.
All right, you know.
I'll need your driver's license then.
You said it would take perhaps a year max to construct the temple, when the time is right and everything falls into place. Is there any possibility that during that year, that perhaps all these people that are being trained at the Temple Institute and elsewhere, that there might be, for that short year, sacrifices offered in something, I'm sorry, not sacrifices, offered, I call myself, in perhaps tabernacle type of structure, or would it have to just completely wait on the temple?
The tabernacle is passé. Because from the tabernacle was the holy temple in traveling form, in miniature, modest form throughout the desert, and then in the initial years in Israel while the land was being apportioned to the tribes. But from the time that Mount Moriah was chosen, was clarified through Samuel, that became the only place where the altar could be built. So it has to be on the exact same spot. In any event, there are, if you read in the book of Ezra, when the returnees came back from Babylon, they began the temple service even before the temple was built. They began aspects of the service. There are aspects of the temple service that can already be done now, even without the altar, even before the temple is built. So it's a question of progress in stages that we would be looking at.
Any more questions? Sir, ma'am, sorry.
Did you say that under King Josiah that the Ark of the Covenant was hidden?
Correct.
And what makes you think that it was hidden under him and that it's better?
It's a verse in 2 Chronicles. I'll find it in the meantime afterwards.
Sir.
Yes, the alignment of the eastern gate with the third temple, could you discuss that?
The eastern gate, I don't know what you're referring to exactly, because there is no eastern gate now that is original. So there is a theory that lines up the eastern gate today with the Dome of the Spirits. However, again, it's not based on fact, because that gate is not even from the time of the Second Temple. That is not the original eastern gate. So it's another attempt to realign things according to a particular agenda, but it's just the wrong place. Yes, sir.
Do you see any significance, or do you have an opinion on the snake in the wall?
On the snake in the wall, gosh, I don't really interpret things in a prophetic way. It's a snake, Old walls do have snakes in them in Israel.
It's a very common snake.
It's a very common snake. I don't really see it as a portent of the end of the world.
And it's non-poisonous.
Yes, sir.
Just as a point of clarification, when you said red heifer, was that the one born in August? It hasn't been the one that's actually qualified through the first 3 years.
No, it's still only a few months old. And if it's not this one, it could be the next generation. The point is now we have a herd that hopefully we'll be able to work with.
Okay, let's do one more question.
Okay.
Okay, one more. Who's got the last question? Thank you. Go ahead.
I heard you mention that you all were training the Cohen,
Yes.
I'm really curious, among this group, will the Cohen Hagadol be selected, or how will that work out?
The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is elected by a body called the Sanhedrin, which is the supreme body of wisdom. So when that body is officially reconvened, they would actually elect the Kohen Gadol.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
By the way, these two talks will be delivered again in Texas. So if in the region, drop in and say hi, okay? Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you all so much. God bless you.
Okay,